Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on global development, looking at gender inequalities in the developing world. Whilst there have been many improvements globally in gender equality, with more women in education, employment and positions of power, there remain gender inequalities in many cultures. This gender disparity is most pronounced in low-income countries, or LEDCs. There are many different measures of gender equality that are used internationally, but in this video we're going to focus on three of the biggest social factors, that is, access to education, healthcare outcomes and levels of employment. Whilst there have been many improvements over the past 2 decades, since women became the focus of many development policymakers, there are areas where the situation has reversed, namely with women being victims of either internal or international conflicts, and the illegal trafficking of women. Furthermore, women are more likely to be the victims of gender-based violence, particularly in traditional cultures, although this is by no means exclusive to LEDCs. One of the success stories of development has been the greater inclusion of girls in education, although this has not been without its problems. UNESCO estimate that around 122 million girls of school age are not in education, which when compared to boys at 128 million shows that there has been movement towards greater parity in recent years. One of the initial development goals was to achieve universal primary education, and this is seen as progress. However, in the post-pandemic era, this has increased by almost 6 million, and with the mass exclusion of girls and young women from education in Afghanistan, this has shown a backward step in the aim of universal primary education. Almost 30% of girls out of school, however, are in sub-Saharan Africa, and many are located in areas where typically there is higher levels of children out of school, that is, areas of conflict and low-income nations. Globally, 1 in 10 children of school age are not in education, according to UNESCO. Another social measure is healthcare outcomes. Whilst women live longer than males by 6 years as a global average, there are inconsistencies in the healthcare of women in the developing world compared to those in the West. In the African region, women are more likely to die of communicable diseases, and globally, cardiovascular diseases are the biggest killer of women. Women will have higher rates of anemia brought on by iron deficiency, and it's estimated by the World Health Organization that 30% of all women are anemic, and of the 468 million that this accounts for, the majority are based in LEDC nations. In terms of life expectancy, whilst the global average has peaked at 80 years of age, women in the African region have a life expectancy of just 58 years of age. This is still higher than the male average for the same region at 52 years, but significantly lower than women in the Western world. Finally, maternal fatalities, women who die in childbirth. Of the 250,000 deaths in childbirth each year, almost 99% occurred in the developing world, which illustrates the inequalities in health between women in the West and those in LEDCs. It's long been suggested by critical theorists that one of the reasons that development policy is focused on getting women into employment is so that they can be exploited for lower wages, and this was argued by Diana Leonard in the early 1990s. But despite more women moving into employment in the developing world, there is still a disparity, not only with men, but with the Western world. Despite the outsourcing of textiles and light manufacturing to LEDCs, many women remain out of the labour market in 2022, according to the International Labour Organization, who found just 47% of women were employed, compared to 72% of men. Compare that to the UK, where the rate of employment for women is 75%. It demonstrates that there is still a long way to go for women in LEDCs to gain parity with their Western counterparts. While some argue this is due to traditional values in the developing world and patriarchal cultures, the International Labour Organization's own survey suggested that 70% of women in LEDCs wanted to work and have the opportunity to gain a career. There are no nations that currently restrict women's participation in voting, and there has been a significant increase in the number of women participating in politics globally since 1995, where just 11% of elected representatives were female. In 2022, this was 26%. However, critics suggest that women gaining universal suffrage is just one obstacle to political participation, with many coerced into not voting, either by their partners or by organisations. Even when they have the ability to vote, the role of voter ID schemes limits women's participation. In Egypt, for example, despite being automatically enrolled to vote, only 47% of women were able to do so due to a lack of identification. Finally, conflict. Many different agencies, including the UN and NATO, have highlighted the impacts of conflict on women and how women are more likely to suffer the effects of conflict than men. This can be either direct effects such as displacement, injury or violence from fighting, or indirectly through being forced out of their homes and livelihoods and becoming susceptible to illegal trafficking in order to escape the situation they are in. Enright and Hochschild argued that conflict in the developing world is one of the primary drivers behind women's migration, and with few legitimate routes to escape, many are trafficked or become victims of modern-day slavery. The UN estimates that almost 5 million women are forcibly trafficked into the sex trade globally, with a further 6 million being forced to work in other industries as a result of illegal trafficking. That concludes this Tutors to You Sociology topic video on global development, looking at gender inequalities in the developing world. Thanks for watching.